You hit your overlords, you've been enduring, and maybe that sweet, thick demon Valgavoth has been whispering in your ear. That's based, but if you're like me, you've also accumulated a bunch of other Duskmourn cards in the process. For those in a similar situation, or for those that want to get in on the Duskmourn action without breaking the bank, stick around for the 25 best budget commander spells in the House of Horrors. There are two standout commons, Monstrous Emergence and Unable to Scream. Monstrous Emergence trades the instant speed of other similarly costed bite spells to keep your creatures out of harm's way. You choose a creature on your battlefield or reveal a creature from your hand. Whichever one you choose deals damage equal to its power to a target creature. Over are the days of casting a bite down only to be met with a removal spell in that classic 2-for-1 exchange. Just reveal a creature from your hand for that clean 2-mana green creature removal. I also want to point out that the language is choosing a creature you control instead of a target creature you control. If you've strapped Lightning Greaves on your Ghalta, Bite Down can't put that 12 power to work. Monstrous Emergence gets around that shroud and does. Unable to Scream is possibly the most efficient humble spell ever printed in blue. For a single blue mana, you can enchant a creature, making it lose all abilities, turning it into an artifact creature, and changing its base stats to 0 power and 2 toughness. The second ability is, without a doubt, printed for Duskmourn Limited, not allowing a face-down creature to be turned face up, but it may come in handy at some point in your commander life. Regardless, 1 mana to turn off a commander is potent removal, demanding enchantment hate or the eventual demise and recasting of said commander. In either case, it's a trade you are happy to make. Grand Entryway / Elegant Rotunda is the best common in white. Grand Entryway specifically is pretty sweet. For 1 and a white, you'll be able to unlock that room, creating a 1/1 white Glimmer enchantment creature token. That is 2 enchantments entering the battlefield for 2 mana. That's 2 constellation triggers. That's 2 eerie triggers. It'll need a little setup to get the full value, but you're looking at a pretty high ceiling for a 2 mana play. Innocuous Rat is the best common in black. Born to Die, this creature lets you manifest dread when it does. That is, looking at the top 2 cards of your library and placing one face down as a 2/2 creature and placing the other in your graveyard. Replacing itself with a bigger body is a nice feature, but combined with that card selection, this rat may not be as innocuous as it seems. You can flip over that 2/2 creature that's face down if it is a creature for its mana cost. And if you're doing delirium stuff or reanimation or any other number of graveyard shenanigans, the Manifest Dread will help you set that up. Grab the Prize is the best common in red, and it's not just because the art and flavor text are 10 out of 10. This is another angle of the discard a card and draw 2 cards spell that red is quite familiar with at this point. This variation will deal 2 damage to each opponent if the card you discarded was not a land. In burn decks, having a card advantage spell tied to advancing your game plan is pretty big news. Other than that, these spells are always valuable as a discard outlet to enable those strategies or just to get a fatty in the graveyard. And for what it's worth, a Scary Clown card may just inflict some psychic damage on your opponents. You never know. I had to round out the color pie, and that color pie was the appetizer. Now we feast on uncommons, right after you take 3 seconds right now to subscribe to the channel. Thank you. Exercise is the kind of spell you can throw in any white deck. 1 and a white, sorcery speed, exile target artifact, enchantment, or creature with power 4 or greater. White is not short on removal options, even options to exile, but having all 3 of these options on a single piece of cardboard is a notable development. And speaking of options to exile, Sheltered by Ghosts is probably the card I want to see in action more than any other spell on this list. For 1 and a white, you get this enchantment aura that exiles a target non-land permanent an opponent controls until the aura leaves the battlefield. It also gives the enchanted creature +1/+0, lifelink and ward 2. Few things. Exiling a non-land permanent is a massive amount of flexibility. Ward 2 is a non-trivial amount of protection, and why the heck does it give it lifelink as well? Like, this thing is just doing it all. The reason I'm so excited about this in a 4-person format is the tension that the two non-affected players will have. Of course, the player with the commander you stole is going to try and get it back, but for the other two, even if your enchanted creature is a problem, will it be worth it for them to remove your creature to give a different opponent back their commander or another scary permanent? It's hard to say, really. What I do know is that symmetric board wipes are far less enticing for those two players, on account of that other opponent getting ahead on the other side of that resolution. If you've played with it already, I want you to let me know how it went for you down in the comments. To round out the white removal, Unwanted Remake is literally the unwanted remake of Path to Exile or Swords to Plowshares. Alright, that's too far. It's not unwanted, but it doesn't stand up to the OG, just like most sequels. It's a 1-mana instant to destroy a target creature, letting its controller manifest dread. That's about as efficient of removal as you can expect to see, and you'll be happy to put this in any deck with white. Shard Mage's Rescue is a protection spell, a 1-mana enchantment aura with flash that grants hexproof to the enchanted creature on the turn that the aura entered the battlefield. The enchanted creature also receives a +1/+1 boost. In terms of protection spells in white, it's not as efficient as Blacksmith's Skill or Lauren's Escape, which also grant indestructible for 1 mana, but this is an enchantment as well. In fact, it's the first white aura that you can flash in to grant hexproof, an ability reserved for green and blue until now. Surgical Suite / Hospital Room is the last spell in white. The first half of the room is 1 and a white. Surgical Suite returns a target creature card with a mana value 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. If your commander meets that criteria, this is a quality addition to skirt that commander tax, while providing a mana sink on the other half. Hospital Room lets you put a +1/+1 counter on a target attacking creature whenever you attack. It's not the most inspiring ability, but it at least being an option after having recurred a mana 3 or less creature is nice to see. You could even cast this as the Hospital Room with your 3-mana commander on the battlefield as removal deterrents. Who's going to use a removal spell on Daxos when they know you can bring it back the very next turn by unlocking Surgical Suite? This will surely excel in enchantment-based decks where you can capitalize on those synergies, but I wouldn't be afraid to run this in any deck where mana 3 or less creatures matter a whole lot. Moving on to blue, Fear of Isolation is for sure the spell I want to see in action in this color. It is a 1 and a blue 2/3 flyer with an additional casting cost of returning a permanent you control to its owner's hand. You know what's a great spell to return to your hand? Yeah, you guessed it. Surgical Suite, the recursion spell we just talked about. This isn't the kind of spell you can toss into a deck willy-nilly, but with a little bit of intention while building to maximize entering triggers, Fear of Isolation is a quality enabler for that strategy. Now, I'm not quite sure it's correct to purposely build answers to a John Orenicus or Beamtown Bullies, because those abilities are pretty rare to come by. But this Nightmare is a solid one-time answer to that strategy as well, returning that creature you control to its owner's hand. Floodpit's Drowner is a cool spin on blue removal. 1 and a blue, this creature can flash in to tap down and put a stun counter on a target creature. For an additional 1 and a blue, you can choose a creature with a stun counter on it, shuffle it, and shuffle itself into the respective libraries. The 2-mana ability with a creature attached to give yourself and the table a couple turns of reprieve from a particularly scary creature is already good enough to consider, but the option to shuffle away that creature and itself makes this even more fun. If your opponent doesn't read the card to explain the card and tutor something to the top of their library while their creature still has a stun counter on it, the Drowner can hose them really hard by shuffling their deck. More often than not, though, you can use the shuffle to your advantage, brainstorming a couple cards off the top of your deck that you don't want to see right now. Get Out is 2 blue to either counter a target creature or enchantment spell, or return 1 or 2 target creatures or enchantments you own to your hand. Counter magic is famously not the most popular interaction to be on the receiving end of, but a blue player's gotta do what a blue player's gotta do. This will deal with any commander, like the Kalias and Urzas of the world, that you don't even want to see hit the battlefield. But the other half remains relevant, not in the way that Fear of Isolation is, to get more enters triggers, but rather as protection from theft. This targets creatures and enchantments you own, instead of ones you control, so you can get your stuff back into your hand, while hindering an opponent's game plan. Black is another color that is loaded up with juicy uncommons, starting with Withering Torment. For 2 and a black, you can destroy a target creature or enchantment at instant speed. You'll lose 2 life in the process, but who cares about that? Another spell that can deal with enchantments in black that isn't way overcosted is a huge development for the color. This won't fully be replacing Feed the Swarm because that does cost less mana, but the instant speed and probably less loss of life makes picking one over the other a pretty tricky decision. I'm interested to hear what you have to say. You only get to pick one of these to play for the rest of your life. Are you going with Feed the Swarm, or are you going with Withering Torment? Cynical Loner is a card I really want to try out. Being unblockable by glimmers isn't interesting, but the survival trigger, if the creature is tapped at the beginning of your second main phase, is interesting. You get to search your library for any card and put it in your graveyard. A repeatable Entomb can be a frightening prospect, but the 1 toughness is a little bit of a concern. It seems like this is going to be an exceptional play on curve, but maybe a dead draw later on in the game if you aren't running vehicles or mounts or Springleaf Drums. Live or Die is expensive at 3 and 2 black, but it's also instant speed recursion for any creature in your graveyard. Even if this didn't have the second option to destroy a target creature, this is pseudo removal anyway, as you can fire this off in response to attackers being declared to put something of yours in front of that attacker, just ambushing it and destroying it anyway. If you've watched my channel for any length of time, you know I'm not a fan of Etali Primal Storm, but this spell gives you a good reason to run it. Cast Live or Die on the end step before your turn to return the dino, and you've got this huge value attack trigger that you can get immediately. I'm looking forward to seeing how this spell performs. Nowhere to Run is a flash removal enchantment, giving a target creature -3/-3. That will surely be able to deal with something, even something that's hexproof, because that last ability allows creatures your opponents control to be targeted as if they didn't have hexproof, and also causes ward abilities not to trigger. In the age of Vel'Gavoth, getting around ward triggers is as valuable as it ever has been. I think this card can really go in any deck that's running black, but I think it's really gonna shake up some local metas where the Saurons and Vohas of the world have been running wild. And for the Timmies of the world that want to try out black, Vile Mutilator is here for you. It's a 5 and 2 black demon with an additional casting cost of sacrificing a creature or enchantment. In return, you get a 6/5 flying trampler that forces each opponent to first sacrifice a non-token enchantment and then sacrifice a non-token creature. That's a lot of permanents leaving the battlefield, and I love that it specifies a non-token as well, getting around the classic downside of the edict effects. There's nothing really else to say. It's just a big boy that will totally warp what the battlefield looks like. In red, Untimely Malfunction is the clear star of the show. It's a 1 and a red instant that will destroy a target artifact, change the target of a target spell or ability with a single target, or make up to 2 creatures unable to block for the turn. Destroying artifacts is classic red. You love to see it. Making creatures unable to block, it's also classic red. you also love to see it. But the real action is that middle option, letting you redirect the target of a target spell or ability. Pinpoint removal on your commander is actually pinpoint removal on their commander. A funny one is redirecting the target of Chandra's Ignition to maybe do a single point of damage to everybody instead of just losing the game. Fear of Burning Alive looks like a quality top-end addition to burn decks. It's 4 and 2 red, and it's a 4/4 that deals 4 damage to each opponent when it enters. If you have Delirium, that enters damage, and every subsequent non-combat damage that you deal to an opponent will also deal that much damage to a target creature that opponent controls. Hitting Delirium is key, for sure, in making this spell work out, but if you do and just keep enacting your game plan, you could be in a position to be burning your opponent's life totals down while not letting them keep any relevant creatures on the battlefield to fight back. I'm not alone in having a fear of burning alive, and this card isn't helping. Vengeful Possession is not extraordinarily special as a threatened variation, but I think it's in the top 3 of this ability. At 3 mana, this is the first one that offers immediate hand smoothing, letting you discard a card and draw a card as you gain control of a target creature until the end of the turn, untapping it and giving it haste. These spells work best in sacrifice shells, where you can take something impressive, hopefully get an attack or combat damage trigger, and then sacrifice it so your opponent can't return the favor. Like I said, this hasn't really changed the game for this type of spell, but being able to dig a card deeper into your library is certainly worth calling out. Timmy players can again rejoice, for Eltenak, the Thrice Called, is here. For 5 and 2 green, you get a trampling 9/9, which is a heck of a big body. More than that, if it ever gets targeted by an opponent, you get to draw a card when they do. What I like most about Eltenak is that it isn't necessarily a dead draw if you draw it early, because you do have the option of discarding it for 1 and a green to return a target land from the graveyard to the battlefield tapped. That is conditional on having a land in your graveyard in the first place, but that isn't the hardest condition to meet in green. When it comes down to it, massive creatures doing the smashing can get the job done, and Eltenak is a massive creature, and from what I've heard, more than happy to do the smashing. Green excels at dealing with artifacts and enchantments, but Cathartic Parting offers a new flavor. For 1 and a green, the owner of a target artifact or enchantment an opponent controls shuffles it into their library. You can also shuffle up to 4 cards from your graveyard into your library. Against plenty of commanders, there's a negligible difference between destroying or shuffling an enchantment or artifact. But against others, I had to be much more inclined to shuffle it in. It's only sorcery speed, so it's not the most exciting option, but I don't want you to overlook this spell either, especially because it's yet another theft defender. Someone stole your soul ring, so you can cast this and shuffle it back into your library. The second half is also just a nice bonus. You already cast a Beast Within, might as well shuffle it back into the deck so you can possibly draw it and deal with another threat down the line. The last green spell is Insidious Fungus. At 1 green, it offers a 1/2 body with 3 choices you can make if you pay 2 to sacrifice the creature. Destroy target artifact, destroy target enchantment, or draw a card and then put a land from your hand onto the battlefield tapped. The last ability makes this fungus eerily close to like a Wayfarer's Bauble when you think about it, but regardless of that, it's a nice ability to have, as are the other options. Put this in front of an attacker before sacrificing it and you're golden. The last spell is the only multicolor spell, Drag the Roots. This is doing its best impression of Assassin's Trophy, and in the right circumstances, outcompeting the Golgari staple. For 2, a black and a green, you destroy a target non-land permanent at instant speed. If you have Delirium, meaning 4 spell types in your graveyard, that cost is reduced by 2 generic mana. Suffice it to say, this color pairing makes frequent use of the graveyard, so meeting that threshold won't be the biggest hurdle in most cases. And in those cases, this spell is darn close to an auto-include. There we have it, the best 25 budget spells from the Duskmourn House of Horrors set. Whether you've got random cards left over from pre-release or you're hitting the LGS with $10 in your pocket, keep an eye out for these to slot right in to your 99. I want you to let me know, what spells did I miss? What spells from this list have already gone hard for you? Let me know in the comments below. While you're there, remember to subscribe to the channel, and I'll catch you next time for some more monkeying around.